So I wanted to talk about Slay the Princess, the Pristine Cut. This is a visual novel of sorts. It is horror based. It looks black and white. There's a lot of cool art style to it. It seems like it's almost like a hand-drawn art style. And you're basically playing this character who's sort of like, I guess, the hero or the adventurer. And you're going through and there's a princess in a dungeon and you have to save her. But the catch is that the narrator who narrates throughout the game is telling you not to do this. Like, the game starts out right away. Narrator is like, hey, bro, don't save her. That's a terrible idea. If you try to save her, the world's going to end. And we don't want that. And you're like, I don't know anything. Or why is she locked up? I don't know what's going on. And so as you're playing the game, you kind of start to learn sort of what's happening and who this character is, but it's all still very mysterious. Now, the way this works compared to, let's say, other visual novel experiences is it's a time loop sort of game as well. You're going to be replaying it through the scenario 2, 3, 4, 5 times in a row, and that's kind of how it works until you finally reach the end of the game. So if you're not into games where you have to really do the same thing over and over and over again, it might not be for you. But for somebody like me who usually doesn't like that type of game, the game varies it enough each time with the scenarios to make me want to keep going. Like, some scenarios start out similar in terms of dialogue and options, but then as you go further along in the scenario, the dialogue may change, the look of the world may change slightly, everything that happens is completely different. And then the further you go into it, by the second try or so, you kind of start to learn what the overarching goal is, like what's the goal you're trying to achieve, sort of. And it's enough to kind of keep you intrigued. We're not given still straight answers, but it's just enough to kind of feed you little bits at a time. And the game gets very intense, even though it looks like, oh, it's a cutesy visual novel sort of thing. It gets very intense and gory. I would not recommend for kids to play this. It gets pretty gruesome, more than you would expect going into it. I like that the writing is different as well. Like, the dialogue choices are kind of a simple text format they use, but whenever the princess talks, her writing is kind of like red and kind of bloody, and it's different from everybody else. And when you go further into the game as well, you start getting other voices in your head besides the narrator that are starting to influence your decisions. You start hearing like a voice of a hero, or a voice of a skeptic, or a voice of love, and all these little emotions and voices get introduced. And what's interesting too is that it's all voiceover based, like everything's voiced over, which is nice. And that brings kind of some emotion and reaction, especially with the narrator. Is always an interesting character because, you know, a lot of these voices in your head you don't see. The only other person you see in the game is the princess. And there is a mirror where you get kind of a glimpse of what you look like. You get a rough idea of what you look like. But then that's it. And so the game has to sell you on how the text is portrayed through voice, and it works very well. You get a lot of options from the get-go, and sometimes you might pick the same option over and over again because you're like, well, I already kind of did this, but you get a different outcome. And it's always cool to see. And I'm partway through the game. The game's gonna take a few hours to get through, but it's not super long. And I'm curious how it's gonna end. I don't know the way this game plays, if the ending is the same, but everybody's destination to get there is different, or the ending also could be different depending on which destination you pick. This is one of those where everybody can have a completely different experience in terms of what happened with them. It's possible they may experience things that I wouldn't experience if somebody else were to play it, because there's so much branching paths. It's a lot to keep track. It's kind of like an Obsidian game, sort of, where it just, even though it starts so simple and has so few characters, there's so many options and possibilities and new little things that get introduced that keep you going. And I think it's best if you play this game by like chapter sections. The game's split into acts or chapters. I recommend playing this game as like one run, so to speak, at a time. Go through the game experience once, and then you're gonna go through it again, but wait till like the next day to do it. Don't try to play this all in one go. It's better if you pace it out. I feel like the game's kind of set up to be that way, and I think you're gonna get a better experience overall. So therefore, I recommend checking this out. Again, if somebody doesn't like procedurally generated stuff or kind of like having to do things over and over again, this is one of the few games that appeal to me. I don't find doing the same thing over and over again annoying, just because they do add enough variety there to want me to keep going, and I want to see how this kind of all wraps up in the end, because playing it as many times as I have already, I still have no idea what the end game's gonna be. Even though I know what the goal is, I still don't know what the results of that goal are going to be, and that's what's interesting to me. So definitely recommend. I played it on the Switch. It's a good, solid Switch game to check out. Easy to play handheld on the go if you need to while you're waiting or out and about. Definitely recommend for sure.